Well, hello there, good people of the outdoors. It's the Big Heavy coming at you today with 5, actually let me try that again with my non-janky hand, 5 tips for camping in the rain. And I've tried to make these broadly applicable, whether you're car camping, bike packing, backpacking, and these come from my 3+ decades of hard-won experience messing around the outdoors. Sometimes, and probably more than occasionally, getting caught in the rain, whether it's a little shower or a downright deluge. So without further ado, let's jump into those tips. So tip number 1, assume it's going to rain. And this comes as you're packing and planning for your trip, and it's kind of a 2-element tip. So the first tip is mental. If you're assuming that it's going to rain at some point during your journey, you get out there and it starts to rain, you're not going to be surprised, and therefore you're not going to be disappointed. So if you're mentally expecting, hey, at some point during this, probably gonna rain, it's not a big deal, I'm ready for it, you'll be 2 steps ahead of the game. The second side of that tip's a little more practical. If you assume it's gonna rain, then hopefully you're going to do things like pack your rain fly for your tents. You're going to not only pack your rain gear, but put that towards the top of your packing supplies. Whenever I go camping, if I'm going car camping, I will generally leave my rain gear in the car if it's going to be parked close to where we're camping, or I'll put it right at the top of my duffel bag or in some sort of tote so it's really easy to access. I know exactly where it is. If I'm backpacking, my rain gear is the very last thing I put on the very top of my backpack. So if it starts to rain and it starts rather aggressively, I just flip open my backpack, there's my rain gear, I'm set to go. If I'm on a bike, I'll put that at the top of my pannier. I usually put it in the back right, because right and rain both start with R, so that's kind of my mnemonic to remember where it is, so you're not furiously going through all sorts of bags trying to figure out where your rain gear is. Tip number 2, when you get to camp, before you set up, take some time to think about what is this area going to look like if there's just an absolute downpour. And what I mean is look around at the topography of where you're camped. You obviously don't want to set up your tent in the middle of a little depression because that's where water is going to pool. But you can also be a little bit more of a rainwater detective and look around, and if you see an area where it looks like in the past there's been a lot of water flow through there. Some campsites will have an area where water goes when it drains, and you'll see leaves or pine needles kind of pushed aside. You might see what looks like a little micro riverbed where a bunch of water has flown last time it rained. Obviously, you don't want to set up your tent in a spot like that. You want high ground ideally, or if you're on a slope, you want to make sure you're not in one of those little potential future rivers. You also want to look up above you. You want to look around and make sure there's no dry branches or anything that, if it starts to get rainy and windy, could potentially fall on your tent. And at a minimum, maybe snap a pole or do something that's suboptimal there. Or worse yet, if a whole branch falls on you, they call those widowmakers for the obvious reason that if one falls on your head while you're sleeping, it's going to be bad news. Tip number 3, also kind of related to camp setup and your time around camp. Before you go to bed at night, make battening down the hatches or getting ready for weather or whatever you want to call it part of your routine. So for me, if I'm backpacking or bike packing where I've got a really small tent and not a lot of stuff to worry about, I'll put my pack outside after I put my food away. I'll make sure my rain cover's on my pack and it's kind of set up so if it were to rain, nothing that's in my pack will get wet. I'll always put my boots under the little section of my rain fly called the vestibule. It's that little gap between the fly and the tent. And unless it's just obscenely hot and humid, I will always put my rain fly on my tent. Now I may unzip everything possible, I may roll that guy up so I get some good ventilation and some good airflow, but I have it all ready to go. So if it does rain, I basically wake up, all my stuff's put away, I just zip down that fly, and I'm kind of set no matter what the rain looks like. And by doing that, you avoid that scenario where 2 in the morning you wake up when the rain's potentially already falling somewhat aggressively, and the noise of that hitting your tent or a big old drop falling on your face while you're sleeping wakes you up. And then you got to go through the where did I put the rain fly, how the heck do I get this thing on when I'm groggy, it's 2 in the morning, I don't know where my flashlight or my headlamp is, scrambling around like an absolute madman getting soaked. So by setting everything up, putting away all your stuff if you're car camping, get things in totes, get things under tarps, just kind of make sure everything's cleaned up, and if it started to pour, all your key gear would be protected, making sure your rain flies are set up and ready to go, putting boots and whatnot under some sort of coverage so they don't get wet. So basically, when my spidey sense goes off, and for whatever reason I have a pretty good spidey sense where I'll wake up 5 to 50 seconds before it starts to pour, I can either just sort of roll out of my bed or roll out of my sleeping bag, zip things up, or I can jump out of the tent, get one last pee in if it's gonna rain. If I'm car camping where we might have 2 or 3 tents set up, I'll go around, quickly zip up everyone's rain flies, and within 30 to 90 seconds, all our stuff's closed up, I'm back in the tent, I'm still dry, and it can rain as much as it wants, and I don't really have to worry about things. Tip number 4, have a rainy day plan. And that plan could vary depending on what you're doing. So if you're car camping or you're in an RV or something where you're relatively stationary and you might have a bit of room to move around, your rainy day plan might be something like, hey, we're gonna hang out under the big communal tent, or we're gonna sit in our RV or whatever, and we're gonna play some games. And to that effect, every time we go on a big family camping weekend, I take the kids to Walmart and let them pick some random game. And if you walk down the games aisle, there's all sorts of interesting and somewhat stupid new games that are always coming out. Most of them are really relatively compact, and I'll let the kids choose one. Last time we went camping, they chose this thing where you have to say only one syllable words, and it's got some strange caveman theme, and there's a big inflatable caveman stick, and you get to whack people on the head. And we've had a ton of fun with that. It's been great. And when it rains, we can sit around for an hour and play these dumb kind of games. If you're backpacking or you're more lighter weight, a simple deck of cards could have that same impact of giving you something to do while it's raining. And you might be saying to me, hey, everyone in my family or me on my backpacking trip has a phone and we can sit there and browse the interwebs or whatnot. Number one, I'd say, do you really want to go spend time in nature and end up goofing around on your phone, even if it is raining, or do you want to engage with the people around you? And if you say, hey, I'm flying solo, don't need to engage with anyone, I would ask you, is your phone more than just an entertainment device? When I'm backpacking or bikepacking, my phone is generally my camera. It might be one of my main or backup mapping systems, maybe for emergency communications, all the other stuff. So I can't afford to sit there for 5-6 hours while it's raining, playing Candy Crush or whatever, when I need that battery potentially to help me navigate in the morning. So even if I'm backpacking or bikepacking, I would have something that's non-electronic. Could be a book, could be a little deck of cards. If you're a total weight weenie, they make these tiny miniature decks of cards, and you could sit there and play some solitaire to pass the time away. If that sounds really horrible, maybe your plan is, hey, I'm gonna keep moving when it's raining. I would test that before you make that assumption. Are you cool with backpacking in the rain? Have you done it before? Do you know how your feet feel, how your boots are gonna work in terms of traction? Is your pack that promised to be waterproof really waterproof the way you pack it? Do you get too cold? Do you get too wet? Do you get too annoyed? Or are you fine? I've done that several times. I actually find being in the rain relatively enjoyable, particularly on a hot day, and I'll just wear shorts and a shirt, assume I'm gonna get soaked, make sure my pack's covered up so nothing critical in there gets too wet, and I'm fine, but I've tested that. And your testing could be as simple as next time it's pouring, either throw in a backpack or don't, and just go for a walk in your hood, see how you do in the wet, try setting up your tent in the pouring rain, and see if that works out well for you. And if it does, then you have that little, knowledge in your back pocket that, hey, if it rains, I'm cool. I can keep moving and I'm fine. Or conversely, maybe, hey, if it rains, I'd rather hang out in the tent for a day and see if it blows over, in which case maybe I want to bring some cards, maybe I want to bring a book, maybe I want to bring something to do. So last tip number 5, and this is broadly applicable for car camping, backpacking, everything in between. I believe there's 2 kinds of folks that have spent a night in a tent. Those who have lost a tent to mildew and those who are soon going to lose a tent to mildew. And if you're unfamiliar, mildew is this, weird thing. I don't know if it's a fungus, animal, vegetable, mineral, whatever the heck it is, but it basically will grow in your tent when it's damp and it has a little bit of heat to it. And that can start as quickly as 24 to 36 hours after your tent gets wet. And that may not sound like a big deal, except for the fact that I've never seen anything that really effectively gets mildew all the way out. And that mildew is going to stink. It smells kind of like some combination of, wet dog and stale socks, which isn't very nice. It leaves a big old stain on your stuff, and it's just generally pretty nasty. And for the most part, if you get a moderate to good mildew in your tent, that tent's effectively ruined, unless you want to sleep in a old wet sock every night. And no product I've ever seen can fully get it out. Maybe it'll reduce the stink a little bit, but doesn't quite get rid of mildew. So it's kind of one of those one and done type things. And the easy way to avoid mildew is to dry your stuff out, immediately after it gets wet. That can be pretty easy when you get home, even if you're tired, bummed out, whatever, get your tent out, get it drying. I have one of those little retractable clotheslines in my garage. So part of our routine as soon as we get home is we throw that puppy up, put all our wet gear out on it. It's fine. Generally, you don't want to leave tents in the bright, direct sun for too long, but if that's your only option, throw those out, let them dry a little. Back when I lived in apartments, we'd even kind of spread stuff out in the living room over the couches and whatnot and let it dry, because again, getting it dried out is critical. If you leave it wet, if you put it away even just a little bit wet, it's going to get that nasty ass mildew. Now you might be wondering, what do I do if I'm still on my trip and let's say I'm on a 5-day bikepacking trip, day one it pours, I'm sitting there in the morning with this wet old tent. So a few tips there, pack up your wet tent carefully. Obviously if it's still wet and leaking out water, you don't want that to get on your sleeping bag or whatever else you're packing next to it. So to the extent you can kind of squeegee things out a little bit, make sure it's fully packed in your stuff sack, and that'll mitigate some of the water that's in there. Go on about your business, and then as soon as you get to camp, start working on drying that out. What I'll generally do if I've packed up a wet tent the night before is, as soon as I get to camp, I will set up my tent without the rain fly. Most of my tents have a lot of mesh, so I'll set it up. Hopefully there's a good breeze going. I won't put anything in there. It's just the tent, by itself. I might throw the doors open if there aren't too many bugs around and let the air start working through. Once I get that done, I'll throw up a clothesline, put my rain fly on that clothesline, and maybe I'll start working on setting up dinner or something like that. If I'm boiling water, once I get the water going, I'll go and flip that rain fly. I'll do some more cooking. If I've got something that's got to sit for a little while, I'll flip that rain fly again. So I try and flip the rain fly 3 or 4 times on the clothesline. Again, if there's some breeze and some sun, that sucker will generally dry out pretty quick, sometimes in the order of 20-30 minutes. And at that point, I'm ready to set up my sleeping bag and kind of put my rain fly on the tent. So that's it for my tips. There's probably tons more little tricks you can do in there. If you've got some great rain related tip that you've come up with in your camping experience, throw it in the comments for the benefits of the other folks out there. And hopefully, even though you've planned for rain, you'll stay dry and it won't hit you too many times. But when it does, take it in stride. It's all part of being in nature, and it can be actually quite a bit of fun if you're kind of expecting it and are able to laugh about it and have a good time. So until then, this is the Big Heavy signing out. Enjoy the outdoors and keep on rocking in the free world. Peace.
Ever wonder why every talking head on YouTube asks you to hit the like and subscribe button at the end of their video? You were right, because we're living in a computer simulation. And our benevolent robotic overlords get just a little bit of energy every time you hit that like. So do me, the rest of civilization, and our benevolent robotic overlords a favor. Mash that subscribe, be kind to each other, keep living your simulated dreams.